Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at a pure artifact portal list. So this list was pulled from Twitter from a Japanese account. I'm not exactly sure what their name would have been, and unfortunately I don't have the original link, or I would link it in the description below for you guys. But it's an extremely powerful deck, honestly. Just the straight up artifacts that you can pull with this deck is absolutely nuts. We're not running the new legendary, which might surprise some people because of course that's what most people focused on early in the expansion, but I feel like maybe that's going to be a little too slow and inconsistent, whereas you can build a much more reliable artifact deck by just going purely artifacts and really spamming the board hard. So mechanization is amazing because you can take your pick of artifacts. Typically I tend to go for analyzing or ancient and then throw radiance. Radiance are kind of your win condition in this deck predominantly because it's your main big card you can play. Of course, I'm thinking maybe Saphira might be an okay option, even just as a 1 or 2 of, but I've had a lot of success with this deck so far, and the person who originally posted this deck did post, I think, an 11 or 16 win streak, somewhere over 10 wins straight, which is pretty nuts with this deck, so definitely an insane one. But overall, I would say this deck is nuts. We're running a Hydra Alchemist and we've got the mechanization. They're 2 of the new cards. We're also running a single mail, actually a card that I haven't got the invocation to come out of because usually I've drawn it before then, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, as just being a straight draw, it's got pretty decent stat line for a 4-drop. It's got ward and it's got an effect to draw the artifacts you want, so definitely not bad. Otherwise, all you really need to do is get Deus Ex Machina in your hand, which, considering the cards you can use, is pretty simple. It's honestly not too difficult at all, so we're going to get right into this and check it out. So while I haven't got to play a lot of games with this deck, the few games I did play I hadn't managed to lose, which is great. First match here being against Rune. It was pretty solid. I mean, getting a good starting hand is what you want, so 1 and 2 drop is always good. 0 drops, of course, you can basically count as 1 drops. If you pull them, it's great to be able to play them. But an ideal curve would basically be something like Mechanization, Meta Production, Icarus, for example. That's a pretty good hand, even as a standard play. But honestly, probably Magister Line might be a little bit better. You don't normally need to worry too much about losing too many cards, and as you see here, we draw Deus Ex Machina, which isn't difficult in a deck that has really heavy draw power. Although the only problem I had with this matchup in particular was drawing all 3 of my Acceleradiums super early, which is not what you want. You want to be able to stagger your Acceleradiums with your Deus Ex Machina preferably, so drawing all 3 of them can be a bit rough. It just means you have to kind of take advantage of them all at the same time instead of one at a time, where it's much more beneficial. And like I said, you're mainly focusing on Radiant Artifacts being your win condition, so they're kind of your biggest swings. You can also just pump the board, so we go for this and we go for the Analyzing and the Radiance as normal. I tend to avoid the wards. I haven't really found a matchup where I want those yet, but I'm sure they'll exist. I'm sure that going into more dragon matchups, I'll get more used to it and realize that sometimes I do want those wards, and once you learn those matchups, it should be much easier to make decisions on the mechanization. So the Icarus on turn 5, giving us a nice draw. Getting a little Analyzing Artifact, deciding to throw the Acceleradium down and the Analyzing Artifact, mainly because if the Analyzing gets procced, Deus Ex Machina becomes playable, and we'll just sacrifice whatever's in our hand left over. Which is why we played all the Acceleradiums here, because otherwise I'm probably not going to get a chance to play them all out. And there is another Analyzing. Lucky draw, honestly, because it means now we actually get the Storm on this one, and can still play the Deus Ex Machina. Plus, getting more artifacts dying is good, because it does give us a chance to use our new legendary, so that would be a lot of fun if we could get that to go. I'm actually thinking maybe I want to run 2 of those, but I don't want to mess with the consistency of this deck too much until I've tested it a lot more. Definitely just little things that I've considered changing that I'm probably not going to change yet. Definitely want a lot more testing on this deck, as artifacts is a lot of fun. I've always enjoyed playing artifacts, even well before puppets became popular. Artifacts was always something I enjoyed playing. I have plenty of videos over artifact decks at the time when people thought they were super weak, where they were doing extremely well, and honestly it's no surprise. So the great thing about these Radiants is the Evo getting 6 damage is pretty big against a 20 health, so definitely a stable way to go. Truce Adjudication, not great. They got 6 heal, which is a little disappointing. I would have preferred if it was split up a little better, but can't complain too much. So now it's just a matter of finding the solution to get around this. Unfortunately, we lost both our excels, which means it becomes a little bit harder for us to deal with them, but not impossible. Especially with an ancient artifact. So I could have just went double ancient artifact into sub, but I really wanted to play out as much as I could here. So taking advantage of the analyzing artifact and being able to get rid of my entire hand next turn was going to be a lot more beneficial. Especially with Hydro Alchemist being able to put a couple more artifacts in our deck. This time Guardians, which actually do a pretty decent job of defense and attack, so definitely not bad artifacts to use. And there is our chance, so we get full board flood, we only lose one card, and we gain a new hand. So this deck definitely does the job you want. Being able to flood the board consistently is great. The only worry I had in this match was going to be Giant Chimera, honestly, and they mustn't have been able to quite get there with it, which was disappointing for them. But good for me, as this match did end up being more drawn out than I'd wanted it to. Actually, most of my matches I'd played with this deck were fairly drawn out. This deck can definitely be more aggressive as you get more used to it, but I was playing pretty cautiously. Especially considering the deck itself. So you can actually go for double Radiant Artifacts. But I did decide instead to get out of Resonance. I thought that was a bigger fact here. Being stuck in Resonance wasn't going to be a good position to be in. Especially with how many good cards we have. I didn't want to just waste everything here. And now we get a chance for the double Ancient Artifact play, which is great. Even better, Strikeform Golem. It's actually a little bit better removal. Throw down a nice comfortable Irradiant. And then end the turn. Honestly, probably shouldn't have just ended. I probably should have played something like the Analyzing, just to try and soak up some extra damage, but I mean, ending the turn still wasn't the worst possible option that I had available to me. At this point, we're pretty far ahead. The only real disadvantage is going to be if we come up against Giant Chimera, which at this point, if they haven't played it now, I don't know why they'd be stalling. So the odds are they're probably not playing Giant Chimera. They're probably some kind of creation deck. But again, I don't know, if you're playing a creation deck, you'd think you would have at least won by now. But I decided instead just to go with some of my strongest followers, put up as much defense as I kind of can, to really block out the opponent and stop them from being able to Giant Chimera me anyway. I mean, having to get 18 damage to go for lethal with Giant Chimera, it's not impossible at this point because they've played so many spells, but it's definitely not the simplest thing. I mean, they could have, because obviously that Snowman had 23 spell boost, but obviously their odds just weren't in their favour this match. So we go for some draws, do a couple of trades, get some decent value out of these cards was the main aim here. Unfortunately, I was still only too short from lethal, which was a bit disappointing. I would have liked to have got lethal there. But I mean, how do you get around these boards now? Outside of Giant Chimera, I don't think they had really had any answer to begin with, so when you've only got 3 cards that can answer this entire board effectively, you know you're in a disappointing matchup. And now our next matchup here is against Sword. Sword usually presents itself as a reasonably strong class at the moment in rotation. It's definitely still got a way to go. After all, these are recorded reasonably early into the expansion. It is only the first week after all, so there's definitely a lot that will be experimented with. That's where something like this deck can really work. Being able to crush your opponents in the early stages of a week is usually the way to go. So, Servant of Usurpation? I don't know. Either way, pretty decent card, not a surprise. We decided to go for the artifacts because we do have our Biofab anyway. Knowing that it'll be a pretty solid play regardless of what we do. I also decided to just throw it out, so it didn't really make a big difference. But the draw power there is kind of good. Unfortunately, Omen stealing my effect. Great, they get a draw card effect. Damn. So this time I'm pretty sure I go for the Ancients and the Radiants. I wanted to be a little more aggressive against Sword. And considering we'd already thrown a bunch of analyzing in the deck, I thought Ancients was a good way to balance it out. I really want to try the Sword deck. Unfortunately, I don't think I've got any of the Omen, which is disappointing. And I'm also been missing quite a few legendaries for Sword to begin with, which is always disappointing me a little bit, because Sword is quite a fun class. So, Mechanization, doing pretty well. Icarus, going on the draw though. Come on, Icarus. Not so lucky. I actually really wanted to get a Ancient Artifact. It would have been much better. I could have cleared both of these really effectively and not had to worry. Of course, we get the Analyzing here. Not really great, so I decided to just go for the Deus Ex Machina, get it out on turn 6. That's where you want your consistent curve. You will notice both these games I did have Deus Ex Machina. If you don't draw it, you just go through the same play style. Since you have so much potential draw power, getting it definitely isn't hard. I mean, we had both the Radiant and Analyzing, Analyzing Artifact in that hand, which were both draw cards and would have been perfect for that turn if we had have wanted them. So we would have had more than enough to really work that in. But since we did have Deus Ex Machina, now it's just a matter of balancing our resonance while we play these cards out to really balance out the board. I held off using the Analyzing there. I didn't feel like it was really that necessary, especially if it was going to put us into resonance, and I didn't want to waste the Ancient on that play. Although now we're in a much better situation. I mean, we can pretty easily go for this, which means we can set ourselves into resonance. Especially once we trade this, we'll go back into the resonance play. Fortunately, we got Hamlin. I was a little disappointed getting Hamlin of all cards now. Definitely not what you want when you've already stacked your board. But, I mean, it does fill this board space quite nicely anyway, if we had have played it, so that would have been fine. I just completely blanked after I did the attack and clicked end turn instead of actually playing out my Hamlin. Even though I do have confirm end turn on, sometimes it's just force of habit to quickly end, so I could have potentially had a little bit of extra board damage, which would have been good, but not really the biggest concern when it's just a 2-1. So now we get another chance to attack, another chance to use our Analyzings, getting really consistent artifact plays. And being able to throw Hikarabe down to really pull us out of that resonance that we're going to need. So we go into resonance, back out of resonance quite consistently, and get a chance to play our Radiant Artifact down as well. To get 6 damage, taking half of their health. I really enjoyed playing these games. They were a lot of fun. I've always enjoyed this deck. It's such a solid variant. Especially now that we've got some of these new cards. Even just those couple of cards make such a huge difference to the consistency of these artifact decks. So now we get a pretty decent chance to take advantage of some of these cards. So we can put ourselves in and out of resonance all the time, as much as we want. Very easily. Meta will even put us back out of resonance, and then into resonance, which is great. It's a good way to avoid Deus Ex Machina's effect if you want it, because you can either activate it or not activate it based on whether you play it in or out of resonance, which is really simple. So our opponent will seem to be looking for the best way to clear all this, and looks like they found it. It's a pity we didn't manage to get a second Radiant. If we had have got at least one more Radiant, we would have actually just ended this game right here. Which is what we were actually looking for at this point.
You might say I'm a genius.
Considering we're going to be in resonance, I may as well just take full advantage of these cards. I probably should just have substitutioned here instead, but I really wanted to play the Deus Ex Machina, so I mean, trading wasn't the worst option.
I surrender.
And that did lead to my opponent ended up conceding. So overall, this deck is a lot of fun, and the person who created it gets full credit. This is absolutely astounding how well I've done on ladder with this deck. If I was looking to climb right now, this is definitely a deck I would be running in the early stages of this month. I'm not sure how it will hold up later on, but right now it's super solid. I'd definitely try and consider getting some Sephiras in here. I'm just not really sure where I would put them, as trying to mess around with this deck would be very difficult, as the consistency relies pretty heavily on a lot of the low drop cards, and even the high end cards are very few and far between. So if you guys did enjoy the video, hit the like button and subscribe for more content. You'll find the deck list in the description below, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.